CBS Sports.
High drive, center field, hit the wall, grand slam. This is magnificent.
Got a fantasy question? Email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Get ready to win your league.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
Now here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
We have rankings, debates, plus did Scott White know that saves were a category in his Tout Wars draft last night? Find out next on Fantasy Baseball Today. Welcome in Frank Stanfield, joined as always by Chris Towers and Scotty Dubbed. I've been doing too many Fantasy Baseball Today in fives, so I just kind of like merged those intros right now. I just realized I did a cold open, but no worries, we're here, and we have a lot to talk about, including another Carlos Carrasco update, everything else I mentioned thus far, and a recording of Chris singing like Lady Gaga, which was just phenomenal. If you follow Chris on Twitter, you've probably already seen it, but it was so great. Chris,
not that much like Lady Gaga, though quite a bit like Bradley Cooper.
I can do the Bradley Cooper voice for sure.
Yeah,
the Lady Gaga voice, a little more difficult, a little bit out of my range.
Chris, is that what they call a falsetto? Is that what you were doing there?
It was definitely a falsetto. Yeah.
You can tell I don't know much about my my musical terminology, but looking forward to that a little bit later on. It's going to be a lot of fun. Scott, what's going on, man? True story. Scott had to call me last night to talk about his Tout Wars team, which I appreciate. That means, I've become a shoulder to lean on for Scotty.
Wow.
I had to decompress. I'm
glad you got the outlet you were looking for, Scott.
It's fine. He texted me. He texted me, so
fine.
I took it as an open invitation to
that's
chat
fine.
him up for 15 minutes about
That's
my
fine.
team.
I hate talking. I don't even like having friends. So that's good.
If you're wondering what we're talking about, Scott had his Tout Wars draft last night, which is an industry analyst league, expert league, 15-team, 5x5 roto. There are a bunch of different Tout Wars leagues. So if you hear more than one, Chris is in one that had a wacky type of scoring format in roto. And this was another one that Scott is in, and he is the defending champion, 5x5 roto with OBP instead of batting average, 15 teams, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And Scott had the 8th pick. Before we actually get into your takeaways from the draft, someone emailed in earlier, Scott, and asked, why did you choose the 8th pick instead of the first overall pick? So let's start there.
Well, Frank, I don't know why. Okay, so I had the first choice of what pick to take, and I chose to pick 8th. I got the first choice because I am the defending champion. And, my philosophy on that is usually like, if you value a bunch of players more or less the same, then take the pick at the end of that run of players. So I don't know why you would pick first. I also don't love picking on the end in general because it requires you to forecast so far ahead that you end up reaching a lot of times. You end up missing out on important runs because it's just so long in between those back-to-back picks you make. So I generally prefer to pick in the middle, but mostly it was about how much who I thought I'd get in the first round and who I thought I'd get in the second round. And I don't know. It's interesting that they asked it that way because after I picked 8th, like the next few people who got to pick, they basically just picked that order, first, second, third, fourth. So I was confused why they did that. But ultimately, I'm not happy with how picking 8th worked because things did not play out like I planned for them to.
I would say at least the first 2 rounds played out the way that you would want a draft.
No, it really didn't. It really didn't. Let me tell you why. I picked 8th thinking, okay, I want one of the big 3 pitchers. Shane Bieber's obviously my first choice, but most people he'd be the third of those 3. Fine. If for some reason all 3 of them went in the first 8 picks, that's fine too. I'd get Mike Trout, right? That's obviously not a bad way to start the draft. And then the second round, I'd still get another ace like Yu Darvish or Trevor Bauer. That would have been fine with me too. Gets to the 8th pick and nobody's picked a pitcher yet. So I'm still taking Shane Bieber because he's my top ranked pitcher, right? but like it meant I took Shane Bieber earlier than he was supposed to go relative to those other two pitchers. So it was just inefficient in how that played out.
And I do appreciate that you stuck by your rankings there, because when it got to your pick, I was like, oh man, Jacob deGrom, no brainer. And then I was like, but wait, Scott has Bieber ranked as his number one pitcher. So is he actually going to do it? And you did. So I appreciate that you, the advice that you give people is what you use yourself. So Scott had the 8th overall pick, and he wound up taking Shane Bieber in the first round there. I will say, just in terms of industry leagues, what you'll see a lot of the times in these fantasy baseball drafts is it's a lot like in fantasy football, where in industry or expert leagues, where quarterbacks just fall way further than you're used to seeing them. And it's kind of the same thing with starting pitching, at least early on in this draft. So, Scott, I'll just kind of hand it over to you, and you can say as much as you want. I've got some questions, but basically, you started with 2 pitchers, and then your draft started in the 3rd round.
Yeah, so a couple things threw me in this draft. One, by virtue of being able to pick where I picked, it forced me to game plan a little more than I probably would going into most drafts, where, I'm assigned to pick a certain place, and whoever's available there is who I'll take, But this, because I got to choose where to pick, I was thinking ahead to 2nd round, 3rd round, but what might that look like if I picked here versus here? And like I said, it didn't go that way. Beginning with that very first pick, it looks like I reached for Shane Bieber because those 2 other starting pitchers that everybody would take ahead of Bieber were still there. 2nd round pick was fine, taking Nola. Okay, I figured I'd take a starting pitcher in the 2nd round either way, whether I got Bieber in the 1st round or got Trout in the 1st round. But what really killed me, and what really changed the direction of my entire draft, was the 3rd pick, where anybody who's been listening to our podcast this whole preseason knows in the 3rd round, I anticipate getting one of Corey Seager, Alex Bregman, and Anthony Rendon. And while I knew it was a possibility that this would be the one draft where that didn't work out, even though they normally fall to the 3rd, sometimes even the 4th, of course, I knew that was a possibility. I wasn't really planning for it. And I thought if it did happen, it meant somebody else obvious would fall. And I'd take the obvious player who fell. But that's not what happened at all. And in fact, that gets to the other thing that threw me with this draft. The other thing that threw me with this draft was that everybody picked so fast. I've never seen anything like it. It was a minute-long timer, but everybody was making their picks like within 10 seconds, to the point that the live radio program they were doing as this was going on, we had to take a 10-minute break halfway through just so they could catch up to us. Like the picks were going so fast, which, a minute is enough time to pick. I'm not used to not having a minute timer to make a pick, but I'm used to in between my picks having enough time to really take inventory of what's still available, so that I'm making sure I'm not overlooking anybody. And there were times in this draft where it got back to me, even though I'm picking right in the middle, it got back to me so fast that I kind of had to make a split decision with it. And like I'd noticed, oh, that guy was still out there, and I didn't even have a chance to consider him because it was moving so fast. And that really started with the 3rd round. So Corey Seager went off the board. Bregman and Rendon both went off in round 2. It being an OBP league, maybe I should have anticipated that, but they were gone in round 2, much less round 3. Seager was still around longer. 4 picks before I was up in round 3, Seager went off the board to Rudy Gamble of Rasball, who I consider my nemesis in this league. And so I had to fire off a tweet about that, obviously. Thinking, 4 picks till I pick, that's roughly 4 minutes till I have to pick. But in the time it took me to fire off that tweet with everybody picking so fast, I look up after my tweet's out and 25 seconds are left. And obviously I have no idea who to take in round 3 because this hasn't gone according to plan. So fortunately, I was keeping up with my tiers. I crossed up those last 3 names, and Whit Merrifield jumped out as the last of his tier. Weak position, stolen base scarcity. Okay, I take Merrifield. I really don't have time to debate it longer than that. Adalberto Mondesi was still out there. So like if I'm going to make the steals play in round 3, like that's the guy to do it with. I understand it's an OBP league and Merrifield's going to have, like, Mondesi's OBP is going to be terrible, even if he hits well. But Merrifield's, it's not like he's an OBP standout. I probably should have gone Mondesi, and that became increasingly obvious when in round 7, Ketel Marte was there. Again, 15-team league. Ketel Marte in round 7. I felt like I had to take advantage of that opportunity. So I also got Dylan Moore. I also got Jorge Polanco. Like, I have no shortage of second basemen. Filling second base was not a problem for me. So beginning my draft, pitcher, and then my first hitter, Whit Merrifield, it put me in such a hole power-wise that I had to devote a lot of the next few picks to addressing that power need. And I feel like I'm one big pitcher short because of that. One big pitcher short. I had to take Luke Voit in round 5, Nick Castellanos in round 6, Marte in round 7, Carlos Correa because there was a shortstop run that maybe I could have missed out on. Maybe I could have skipped, if I had already taken Mondesi. So Carlos Correa in round 8. So I end up with Bieber in round 1, Nola in round 2, Kenta Maeda in round 4, and then my fourth pitcher is Dylan Bundy in round 9. Not terrible, but I prefer Bundy as like a number 5 versus a number 4. Now, like, you look at my team on paper compared to everybody else's, my pitching staff looks like the best. I won this league by dominating the pitching categories last year, and all except for saves, I'm in line to do that again. But that's just on paper, right? And obviously, if one of those top 3 starters, Bieber, Nola, Kenta Maeda, goes down, as starting pitchers are liable to do, then suddenly I don't have the most dominant pitching staff anymore. And I probably won't be in a position to trade from excess there, which is something I want to be in a position to do. So, it could go fine. I just wish I had one more big arm in there.
Chris, let me work you back in here because I thought the third round was actually a tough spot for Scott because, as he talked about, he had 2 starting pitchers at that point, and I went back and forth myself. I don't even know what I would have done. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you, based on the players that are remaining, if you're in an OBP league and these were the best guys available in a Roto league, Whit Merrifield, Adalberto Mondesi, Aaron Judge, Rafael Devers, Luis Robert is in that mix as well.
Eloy Jimenez was somebody who others told me I should take. Probably Chris wouldn't say that, but yeah, that was some that others were looking at.
I didn't even include him because I knew Chris wasn't going. But for me, I think I probably would have been between Mondesi and Judge. And I'm not even a Judge guy, but I think an OBP in the middle of a third round of a 15-team league, I think it's probably warranted.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think I took Judge. I know I took Judge in my Tout Wars, which was also an OBP. I think it was the 3rd, maybe the 4th round.
But that was a 12-teamer.
That was a 12-teamer, yeah. So this is pick 8 more, of the 3rd team of the 3rd round.
Pressure on every pick to deliver in a 15-team.
38th overall. Yeah, you look at the OBP, the 3 seasons prior to last one. I think last year is one of those that you can kind of throw out. He was at least 381. He is an elite OBP guy. I don't know. That is a tough one though, because Mondesi in a 15-teamer, we just did a 15-team mock, and I took Mondesi with my 2nd round pick. And the nice thing is, you don't have to worry about steals again. Really, in a 15-team league, like if Mondesi steals 60 bases, you might finish 8th in stolen bases just with that.
Right. And that was part of my thinking with Merrifield. Yeah. Obviously, he's, Mondesi could outperform him by 50% in stolen bases. So looking back, that's the one change I'd make is Mondesi in place of Merrifield in round 3. But Judge, obviously, if Judge is healthy, that would be an awesome pick in round 3. But we know the story there. And I just, for my first hitter, like I didn't want to invest in someone that risky.
It's not like Mondesi has fewer injury, a shorter injury track record than Aaron Judge. Mondesi, I think 2018 was like the only time he's made it through a full season without missing significant time, and going back to the minors.
He's been dealing with a foot injury. He's played in a few spring games. I believe he was batting 3rd in the lineup on Wednesday. The biggest
Right.
reason I assume you didn't take him, Scott, is just because his career OBP is 284 at Alberto Mondesi. So while he's
No, I mean, the reason I didn't take him is because I didn't see him in the 25 seconds I had to. And I actually went back through every one of my picks saying, okay, what did I do here? What should I have done here? And, once that Merrifield pick was made, I was kind of locked in for not having a lot of time to decide, for picking. And then I compared it in the article to like playing an AI in chess, where like you're deliberating over your move, like trying to make sure everything is, you didn't leave any stone unturned. And then you click to make the move. And then like immediately the computer takes your queen, like it's like, that's kind of what it felt like here. Because it just went so fast. But yeah, I like that the Merrifield pick gave me a nice steals base right away. I wasn't stressed about steals really the rest of the draft. I did end up taking Dylan Moore, as I said, in round 10. And like between the two of them, it's likely they outperform a healthy Mondesi. There's a chance they underperform a healthy Mondesi too, but I think it's okay. It's just really more about what taking Merrifield as opposed to a power hitter like I expected to get forced me to do with my next few picks. And, with every one, it would have been a reach to take another starting pitcher. Luke Voigt in round 5. I could have taken Carrasco there, Nick Castellanos in round 6. I could have taken somebody like Zach Plesac there, Ketel Marte in round 7. I could have taken Zach Wheeler there. Like that's just not for somebody who already invested 3 of his first 4 picks in a starting pitcher. That's just not great value. I probably should bring up the topic of not drafting a closer. We've already spent 15 minutes on this, but I didn't draft a closer. Wasn't exactly by design, but we talked about this on the podcast before, where I knew I'd be okay with it if it came to that. I didn't want to invest in closer. I'd only get cheapies like Will Smith and Amir Garrett and who else? Joaquim Soria, Daniel Bard, guys like that. And it just never worked out. But I actually went back and looked. I finished first in saves in this league last year, and the only draft pick of mine that made a real contribution to saves was Brandon Kinsler. It wasn't even Mark Melancon. It was Brandon Kinsler. And just over the course of those 2 months, I picked up Trevor Rosenthal. I picked up, I'm forgetting Stefan Crichton, Greg Holland. A couple times I picked up Greg Holland, and I ended up winning saves. And that was addressing that over the course of 2 months. Now this year I have 6 months to do it, presumably. So like, maybe I'm just getting cocky because it worked out so well last year, but I think I can do that again. I think I can go in without drafting any saves and at least be competitive in the category, not necessarily win it.
And I do appreciate that you have 4 Yankees on your team too, Scott. So you already see the Frank effect on your Tout Wars team, which, again, kudos, man. I really do appreciate that. Gary Sanchez, I will just say, I thought was one of your best value picks. Not just saying that, but the 13th round of a 15-team league, I thought that was really, really good value as well. So you can find all these results over on CBSSports.com. Scott had a write-up about what he did in this draft. You can find the draft results there as well. I'll put the draft results in the podcast description here for those that are listening, so you can follow along with what we were just talking about. Before we get to our email of the day, haven't done one of those in a while. I did just want to promote, again, our Fantasy Baseball Today Draft Prep Guide is now live, and the link where you can find it, cbssports.com/FBB Draft Kit. You can download it. You punch in your email. They'll send it to you. It's your one-stop shop to help you dominate your drafts, sleepers, breakouts, busts, rankings, all tier strategies, analysis, and it's all written by us, mostly Scott and Chris, but so some of my analysis in there as well. Again, the link for that is cbssports.com/FBB Draft Kit, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those that are watching, we appreciate you, but you can, for those that are listening, and if you want to watch us live, we usually go live around 10:15. We've been pushing it to like 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, Sunday through Thursdays. And that'll be those will be the days that we do it in season as well. It'll be even later in season because we've got to wait for some games to go final there. So youtube.com/fantasy baseball today. Make sure to join our Facebook group as well. Facebook.com/groups/fantasy baseball today. Email of the day. This one came from Ryan. I was listening to the Baseball Tonight podcast, and Buster Olney is talking about a new baseball potentially having a massive impact on the game, increasing strikeouts and decreasing hitter stats. What do you know about this, and how will it change how you value players in fantasy baseball? And I retweeted a tweet from Alden Gonzalez, who covers baseball for ESPN. And yesterday he said Padres starter Blake Snell has noticed the laces are thicker in the new baseball, allowing him to dig in his fingers so he can more easily throw breaking balls. He also noticed fly balls are not carrying as much as they might have previously. Quote, it's definitely a different ball. That came from Padres starter Blake Snell. Chris.
Wait, have they been using the balls in spring training? Because I was under the impression they weren't.
I believe this is called confirmation bias. And I mean, look, I don't know. I haven't held the balls. I don't know what they're like. I have no idea. Blake Snell is much more intimately acquainted with them. But from everything that I understand, spring training balls are always the previous year's leftover batch. Sometimes they're from the World Series. Sometimes they're from the regular season. So unless they're doing things differently this season, and I have not seen it reported that they are, my understanding was this is the same baseball from 2020, and they won't get the new balls in play until the start of the season.
Yeah, I think it's I think it might be up in the air right now, Chris, because I was watching a game recently and they were talking about how they might have already started mixing them in. Like a lot of the balls that they're using now are leftovers from last year, but they might have already started mixing in some of the new balls as well. So I guess that's kind of up in the air. I mean, I don't think we should take this as nothing. I mean, if it is actually a different ball, Chris, how like,
it will be a different ball during the regular season.
Yeah.
Has that been accounted for in any of our rankings?
Well, I don't know what the effect's going to be. In theory, yes. I mean, they deadened the ball. They made it less bouncy, but they also made it a little lighter, which is going to help it carry more. So what will those two factors counterbalance it? Nobody can really say for sure. I mean, it was first reported, I think, in January. Saris and Ken Rosenthal combined for an article on The Athletic. And in it was speculated that it would return to kind of 2017 standards, I think is what they said, which was the first jump. And then there was a second jump in 2019, right?
It was midway through 2018.
Okay. So the first jump was midway through 2016. And that was really the biggest transformation, where you saw the little middle infielders all become 20 homer guys, was with that first jump. And that's what they were speculating it would return to. But that's speculation too. I mean, theoretically, it could go back to 2014 where you had 11 guys hit 30 home runs in the whole league. We just don't know until we see it playing out. So I don't want to guess with my rankings, like I'd rather reassess than guess.
Yeah. And we can do that once the season starts, maybe a month in, and see how things are trending statistically. So we'll keep you updated on that. And I think, we have talked about this a little bit and how some of those middle infielders could see their power numbers dip. It's part of the reason why we are worried about the power for someone like Kevin Biggio. So they have this tab on baseballsavant.com where you can look at average home run distance. Anyone who has a lower average home run distance from last year or the past couple of years, you might want to devalue them a little bit. And guys that we know hit just absolute bombs. Pete Alonso comes to mind, Matt Olson, guys that just hit the ball extremely hard. They're probably still going to be really safe for power. So just keep those things in mind when it comes to this new baseball. Let's hit some news and notes before we get to these rankings debates that I have. Another day, more Carlos Carrasco news. Mets manager Luis Rojas said on Wednesday that Carrasco is dealing with some soreness in his elbow and won't throw for several days. My initial reaction was that the sky was falling. I was ripping my hair out. I almost said a bad word on Twitter, and Scott came to my rescue there, so appreciate that. But a gentleman named Caleb Phillips actually responded to my tweet and sent me an article about how Carrasco has dealt with this same thing in the past. In spring training, around this time, I think it was mid-March of last year, where he deals with elbow inflammation. So it might just be a thing for Carrasco. We had the report from yesterday that he's late in arriving to camp because of some medical procedures because he had leukemia. So, Scott, at what point do we start to lower Carrasco in the rankings? Because I think we all like him, but this is pretty worrisome.
He's already a guy who slips beyond what I think he should. So if this causes him to slip further, I'm going to be very excited to draft him. So I'm not that worried. I mean, I do remember him having past instances of this. You know, you start ramping up for spring training. It stands to reason there's going to be soreness. I'm surprised we haven't heard about it from more pitchers yet. I haven't heard any talk of him going in for like an MRI or anything. So it doesn't sound like anything to really worry about. I mean, obviously it'll make you second guess when you go to pull the trigger on him in the draft room. I think that's understandable, but you know, stay level-headed with it. It's just soreness as far as we know, and soreness is to be expected.
Astros pitching prospect Forrest Whitley will undergo Tommy John surgery. He will miss all of this season and likely part of next season as well. Plus, the last time we saw him pitch, well, we didn't actually see him, but someone did in the minors back in 2019. He had an ERA over 7, so he wasn't very good. Chris, what does this mean for Forrest Whitley's dynasty value?
It's not good. I mean, this is a guy who, what was it? Are we going back to 2018 where we were expecting him to get called up? Is my timing on that correct?
There was a time when he was the best pitching prospect.
Yeah, 28. So
feels longer ago than 2018.
I mean, he made it to AA in 2017. And in 2018, he only made 8 starts that season. And he was definitely like a weekly feature or bi-weekly feature in Scott's Prospects Watch column. We were expecting Forrest Whitley to get called up anytime then. Now we're not going to see him until 2022, and probably not until, you know, a little bit after the 2022 season gets started. That's less than ideal, but he'll still only be 24 years old. You know, it's starting to feel a little Alex Reyes-ish, but I'm starting to get excited about Alex Reyes again. You know, this season he's thrown really well so far in spring, so it doesn't close the book on him. But there is no such thing as a pitching prospect. That is the phrase. Tin step is the way we say it, and in Dynasty, it's really never all that great of an idea to invest in the 19-year-old pitcher who's tearing up high A. Sometimes it works out, but those guys flame out harder than any other type of prospect.
Scott, if you
the prospect type that hits least often of any is a high school starting pitcher. So, you know, just extrapolate from that. You know, they've got a lot of development and growth left, and you don't know who's going to make it through that growth. Sorry.
Scott, would you try to acquire Forrest Whitley for pennies on the dollar if you could right now in a dynasty?
If it's pennies on the dollar, yeah. I mean, I'm normally going to give a pass to a pitcher who has Tommy John surgery just because it's so common, and the track record of pitchers who return from it is you know, pretty strong. Been picking up where they left off. It's not 100%, but it's pretty strong. So if it's pennies on the dollar, sure. I imagine as of right now, he'll be in my top 100 prospects again going into next season. And it's important to remember, like, Lucas Giolito is a good example. He himself was at one point the top pitching prospect in baseball and looked like he was a total dud. And then he figured it out later on. And that could happen with Forrest Whitley too. So as long as we have reason to believe talent is still there, then you shouldn't, from a dynasty's perspective, you shouldn't entirely give up on him.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
There's no such thing as a pitching prospect thing. You know, that works both ways. It also means that guys who you think are finished are never quite finished. You know, they can figure it out. It's, you know, not just about the volatility of starting pitching in a bad way. It's also just these guys are unpredictable.
From one pitching prospect to another, Marlins starting pitcher Sixto Sanchez will have an innings limit this season. Sanchez has been delayed getting to camp following a false positive COVID test. And there has been talk that he will not be ready for opening day. So I hit up my buddy, Craig Mish, and he reported that the innings limit is likely to be around 150, which I don't really think that's much of a limit anyway for young starting pitchers. There's probably going to be a lot of pitchers around that range anyway. But he also told me that Sixto Sanchez will not be ready to pitch in season until April 12th, which would be the Marlins' 10th game of the season, and that will come against the Atlanta Braves. So I don't think it really changes much, but for the first couple of weeks, we might not have Sixto Sanchez out there.
Yeah, this is like the 150 innings limit is not news to me. Like they had never said that, but I'm working under the assumption that, looking at my rankings, Tristan McKenzie, maybe Tyler Mahle, Shohei Ohtani, Julio Urias, Lance McCullers, maybe Dinelson Lamet, Pablo Lopez, Jesus Luzardo. There's a lot of guys who I would be shocked if they threw more than 150 innings, even if they stay healthy. That's just the reality of like Tyler Glasnow. I would be pretty surprised if Tyler Glasnow throws more than 150 innings. So that's just the reality of the situation that we're facing. But, it makes those guys less valuable relative to the guys who will throw 200 innings, which, might only be one person this year, but maybe there's like 8 or 10 who could actually do it conceivably. But it makes them more valuable than a 150 inning pitcher would normally be, because the total number of innings that you're going to have on your roto team, that denominator is going to be lower than any other year.
Joey Votto, Reds first baseman, has tested positive for COVID. He'll be away from the team for at least 10 days while he waits to clear MLB's COVID protocols. We have had some people email in and ask how we are handling COVID for this season. So, Scott, are we doing anything differently from last year? Should we carry over some of those things that we did? Should we include more IL spots because there are inevitably going to be positive COVID tests this season? What happens if a player tests positive midweek? Should you be able to sub that player out? What do you think, Scott?
I actually haven't thought about that so much. I never have a problem with having more IL spots. Tout Wars has infinite IL spots, and I haven't noticed really a negative impact for that. So I'm always in favor of that. If you want to use the COVID thing as an excuse for it, that's fine.
Yeah, it's still been a significant issue for the NBA so far this season. And, I would guess, you listen to like public health officials and it sounds like maybe, May. I saw today they're expecting like May will be when everybody is eligible to get the vaccine in New York. So you figure, herd immunity shouldn't be that far after that.
Right. That's important too, because like it may be an issue at the start of the season, but as the season plays out, it'll become less of an issue to the point that it's almost no issue. I would say. Yeah,
I think it'll probably, if it's an issue, and it will be at some points, it shouldn't be by July.
Yeah. Cross your fingers. We're all hoping that sooner the better, that things get back to normal in the world and in Major League Baseball. Luke Voit was scratched from Tuesday's Grapefruit League lineup due to right knee soreness, but manager Aaron Boone wasn't too concerned about the issue. So we'll see what happens with Luke Voit.
He got his orthotics, right? Was that something we talked about? Did he get orthotics this offseason for the feet?
Yep.
Because you would think, I had to get orthotics because of recurring ankle pain because of my feet, it turns out. So, I just wonder, sore knees, I don't know, maybe it's entirely unrelated, but it crossed my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it was part of the reason why, at least early on in the draft season, I was fading Voit for a little bit, but see what happens there. Astros manager Dusty Baker said Wednesday that Miles Straw and Carlos Correa are the leading candidates to begin the season as the leadoff hitter. Obviously, as the Miles Straw podcast here in 2021, we were pretty excited about that possibility for him. Carlos Correa's pretty weird. It doesn't really strike me as a prototypical leadoff hitter. I thought maybe Altuve would be in that mix, even Alex Bregman, because he walks so much. But
he's not that different from George Springer at this point in their careers.
Correa?
Yeah.
He doesn't walk.
Probably doesn't walk quite as much, but you're still probably, if he hits, he's going to have like a 370 on base percentage probably.
True. Fair enough. So, Correa. I mean, if he leads off, he'll give you more runs scored, but will likely sacrifice some RBI for those who play in points leagues, for those who play in roto leagues. But in points leagues, you'll get more plate appearances. So that can help Carlos Correa. If you are watching on the video side, don't go anywhere. If you are listening to the podcast, we are going to take a quick break. But when we return, we have an update on our listener leagues. So Chris asked for some Joey Gallo lyrics to cover the song Shallow from A Star Is Born. And we said we would give away a spot in the podcast league to the best lyrics that we received. And we got a bunch. And I really do appreciate them all. But the winner and the one that Chris ultimately went with were the lyrics from Sean Millerick. I hope I got your name.
Yeah.
Millerick? Question mark. So the lyrics you sent in, Chris went on to sing them. And this is his best Lady Gaga impression. So please enjoy.
You're falling in all the good times, you're still a bargain in this range. You'll only bust if you're on the aisle. Scouts at the deep end, join Chris and dive in. His numbers will astound. The real life Chris Davis, why'd we trade Elvis? Just draft Joey Gallo now. Cue up Gallo, Gallo. Just draft Gallo, Gallo. Click on Gallo, Gallo. Just draft Joey Gallo now.
Oh man,
Beautiful.
Chris is probably disappointed you queued up that part of the song as opposed he actually sings well at the beginning when he's doing the male part, you know?
There was no chance that I was going to give him the Bradley Cooper part, like 100%.
That's fair. It just, you started right at like, I really just like whiff on that first note.
Yeah, you butchered that one for sure.
No, it was fun. That's how I spent my morning today. My wife went out to the doctor. I had the apartment by myself, so that was how I spent my morning.
Oh man,
apologies to my neighbors.
I was just about to say, I can only wonder what your neighbors were thinking, because that must have been something. And for anyone who just listened to that, or if you're watching and you heard it, that song will be stuck in your head for at least the next 24 hours. So
true.
Joy, because I've been singing it all day long. So
Frank,
great. Yep.
Oh, go ahead. I want to go back to that discussion of the baseball and spring training, but whenever you're ready.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say thanks again to Sean and
yes, thank you, Sean.
So
that was excellent.
If you have an update on the baseball, go ahead, Chris.
It's not an update on the baseball so much as just. So I went back and looked at spring training stats, and obviously we're only 10 days in or whatever, but spring training stats for 2021 through 2016. I took 2020 out because it was just weird, and we don't know what the impact was, but I did total plate appearances minus strikeouts divided by, or home runs divided by that. So just the share of balls in play that were home runs or balls that weren't strikeouts. Sorry. In 2021, it's 4.45%. In 2019, it was 4.23%. In 2018, it was 4.09%. In 2017, it was 3.62%. And in 2016, it was 3.61%. One, that fits in with the timetable that we've been talking about. If the spring training, the baseball lags in spring training, we didn't see a spring training home run jump until 2018. And there is, at least based on this, there's no evidence that the baseball is carrying less here based on how often home runs are being hit so far. Maybe that will change as we move forward, but at least based on this extremely rudimentary, statistical analysis, I would say that the spring training balls are not different so far.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
or if they are different, there's no effect. But they're probably
Yeah.
just not different.
Yeah, my assumption would be that they're not different, which means we won't know until, we'll know the first few days. We'll have enough data points after like 4 or 5 total games. Because we'll have several hundred batted balls by that point. But at least right now, we don't know what the effect will be. My assumption is we'll see 3 to 5% reduction in home runs, primarily tilted towards players who don't hit the ball as hard. But that's just a guess.
Okay, so let's update people on that the further that we go into spring training, because obviously we'll have more data for every preceding week here as we lead up to the season. Rankings debates. It only took us 40 minutes to get here, but let's spend the rest of the show talking about them. We'll mix and match some roto and some head-to-head points rankings. And of course, you could find these rankings on the site, cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball/rankings. That's it. Ends there. Okay, so let's start off with the head-to-head points one. And up at the top, starting pitchers, someone that Chris is pretty excited about, and I feel like you have made this known, but Brandon Woodruff, who you have ranked as your 11th starting pitcher, Chris, just behind Clayton Kershaw and just ahead of Lance Lynn. Wow, I did not realize you have Lance Lynn that high. So that is interesting as well. But we'll stick with Brandon Woodruff here.
In points.
Scott has Brandon Woodruff 5 spots behind here at SP16. So, Chris, you will go first and explain why you were excited about Brandon Woodruff.
He's really good. He throws hard. He gets a lot of whiffs. He gets a lot of strikeouts. And the concern that I had about him last season, the reason I was a little skeptical of his 2019 breakout was he is bucking the trend of throwing fewer fastballs. This is a league-wide trend that has been going on for a long time. Last season, there were fewer fastballs thrown, or a lower rate of fastballs were thrown than ever before, at least in the pitch FX and StatCast era. He throws a lot of fastballs, but he gets a lot of whiffs with his fastball. And last season, he upped his spin rate about 200 RPMs on average for his fastball, which is a big deal when we're talking about any fastball, but especially one that, is thrown 96, 97 miles per hour. It just, spin rate is positively correlated with whiff rate for fastballs. And it's like a 29% whiff rate or something on his 4-seam fastball last season. That makes me think that his strikeout rate is more sustainable. He can be an elite strikeout guy, even without, elite breaking pitches. And that makes his whole profile look a lot more sustainable. So I like Brandon Woodruff a lot. He's going to pitch consistently deep into games, at least based on what we've seen over the last 2 seasons. For me, part of it is that, my number 10 pitcher and my number 16 pitcher are separated by 10 spots in the ranks. So I've got 7 pitchers in that 10 spot radius. But I just also really like Brandon Woodruff. I think he's really good. And I don't think Scott dislikes him.
No. When I made out these rankings initially, which was like in October or something, so I was, didn't have anything to compare them to. I presumed I was going to be one of the higher ones on Woodruff, and I will move him up 1 spot ahead of Carlos Carrasco. Been meaning to do that, but I put Woodruff on the right side of call it the Lance Lynn line, where basically everybody above the Lance Lynn line I expect to pitch deep into games with great ratios, and everybody below it, they're falling short in one of those areas or the other. So Woodruff's on the right side of that. It's really not a talent question. The reason why he's toward the bottom end of that is because he hasn't thrown more than like 120 innings in a season since 2016, I think, because of injuries. And again, it's more important to me that he's going deep into games, but it does seem possible that at some point they'll have to pull back on him, not so much start to start, but maybe like a phantom IL stunt. Yeah, something like that. So, just a mild concern there, but I love Brandon Woodruff too.
Okay. Yeah. So just a slight difference there in the rankings, and just ahead of Woodruff for Scott, he has Zach Gallen, Kenta Maeda, Walker Buehler, and Jack Flaherty there in head-to-head points leagues, but he still likes him. Let's do one of these. Let's do one of these roto ones, and let's start with, Scott, I haven't really heard why you don't like Pablo Lopez, even though I'm pretty excited about him, and it sounds I think Chris is as well. But it seems like Pablo Lopez did everything last year that should warrant more excitement from you. Swinging strike rate goes up, very solid ERA, pretty good command, solid strikeouts as well. Yet, Scott, you have Pablo Lopez 48th in your starting pitcher ranks in Roto, and Chris has him all the way up at 36. So why are you a little bit lower on Pablo Lopez, Scott?
I think he's just a mid-class pitcher, and I there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'd take him as my number 5 guy. Sure. His swinging strike rate went up to a pretty good level, but, just a little more than the strikeout per inning. His xFIP 373, nothing special. I think he pitches fairly deep into games, but I just don't know that he has the potential to ascend to be like a real high-end option. And it might depend on his ability to develop a breaking ball this spring. It's something he's been working on, but considering he doesn't even have a name for the breaking ball yet, whether it's a slider or a curveball, I'm not sure. I'm not willing to trust it's going to be an actual weapon for him, but it is something he's working on, and that could be a game changer. As things stand now, I just think there's a limit to. I look at his numbers and see a limited ceiling there.
Yeah, Pablo Lopez could definitely benefit from using some type of breaking pitch. Last year, he threw his cutter 8% of the time. He threw his curveball 7% of the time, but really relied heavily on his four seam and his sinker and a changeup, which is very good. It's an awesome changeup. I have compared it to a Luis Castillo light type changeup, but at least even Castillo has a slider to change things up for opposing batters. Pablo Lopez doesn't have that pitch as of now. Pablo Lopez just kind of gives me these Jose Barrios vibes. He hasn't done it for as long as Barrios, but if he gives you a 3.75, 3.8 ERA and a 1.20 WHIP with a strikeout per inning, that's basically Jose Barrios, and you're getting him 50 picks, right? 40 picks.
No,
and Barrios.
That's a solid comp. I just think there's limit to Jose Barrios' upside too. And I rank Barrios higher because he's a guy we've seen go 8 innings with some frequency the past few years, and obviously we haven't seen that from Lopez yet. But I think that's a fine comp for what Lopez could be. Sure.
I think the difference is that workload. Barrios is, when I said there are 8 or 10 guys who could conceivably possibly throw 200 innings this season. It might be more than that. I haven't actually gone through, but Barrios is in that mix. He's thrown 192 and 200 innings in 2018 and 2019. If he gets to 200 innings this season, it wouldn't shock me. I don't think there's any way Pablo Lopez gets there. He only threw more than he only pitched more than 6 innings or pitched 6 full innings or more 4 times last season.
I should clarify. We've seen Barrios work into the 8th inning with regularity. Yeah. He hasn't actually made it a full 8 innings that often.
Yeah. Let's go back over to head-to-head points. And look, if you don't know why Scott likes Ke'Bryan Hayes at this point, then you probably haven't listened to any of our podcasts in the offseason. So we'll start off with Chris. Chris, I don't know if you know this, but you have Ke'Bryan Hayes down at 22 in your third base ranks in head-to-head points leagues. Are you actually down on him, or is it just a product of the third base position?
Well, I would say if you don't know why I'm more skeptical of Ke'Bryan Hayes than Scott is, you haven't been listening to the podcast lately. I am. That's not. I don't know if that came off as a shot against Scott.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Just to say that I am more skeptical than Scott and more skeptical than I think most people when it comes to the 2020 breakouts, especially when we're talking about guys who saw a significant jump in production like Ke'Bryan Hayes did. Obviously, we'd never seen him at the major league level before, but he played at a much higher level than he ever had in the minors. And so for me, it's just a little bit of a, let's see you do it again kind of thing.
So I understand why you rank guys like Josh Donaldson ahead of him.
Are you going to say Kyle Seager? Is that the one?
Gio Urshela. Yeah, I mean, the ones
that's the one that stands out
to get him as far down as 22nd, it means you have to put him behind like Eduardo Escobar and Kyle Seager and Brian Anderson. I know you're high on Brian Anderson, but I think most people would look at those guys, particularly from a head-to-head standpoint where, you don't go that deep into the draft pool and say those are Jags, while Bryant Cabrian Hayes has this, potential to explode and become something more than that.
I think that's fair. I think it's underselling Brian Anderson a little bit. I think he's potentially more than a Jag. He's got better batted ball data than I think he gets credit for. His hard hit rate has been consistently above average. His barrel rate has consistently been, quite a few points above average over the last couple of seasons. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a 30 homer season from Brian Anderson this season. It's all relative, but he does play in a better lineup. There should be more counting stats available for him. So, I think I do have Cabrian Hayes higher than that in Roto at third base.
Yeah,
I would suspect so. Yeah,
I think you had him 17th in Roto.
Yeah,
so about 5 spots higher than in head-to-head points.
But I could move him up. That's one of those ones that I'm once you get past like 170, it's all kind of fungible.
Imagine having a worse lineup than the Marlins. You just said Brian Anderson's in a better lineup than Cabrian Hayes, and it's factual. It's just, just imagine that. It's
name 3 Pirates. Go.
Gregory Polanco, Jacob Stallings.
Are we sure those are real people?
In a standard size mixed league draft, it's very likely just one Pirate is being drafted. Hey, it's maybe Richard Rodriguez, the closer, but that's it. I mean, Mitch Keller would be next, maybe, in some of the deeper drafts we've seen Gregory Polanco taken, but yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. You don't want opening day starter Steven Brault on your team? How dare you, Scott? Let's jump over to Roto and someone who I thought you guys both liked based on the way you talked about him in our pitching preview, but Charlie Morton. Chris has him as his SP29, and Scott, you have him as your SP38 in Roto. So why does he fall out of that top 35, right, Scott? I think it ends with Dylan Bundy, where you want 5 of those top 35. Why is Charlie Morton not inside of that?
Well, I mean, he didn't have a good year last year. And I have pointed out that, after he spent some time on the IL with a shoulder injury, he came back throwing harder. And his numbers regular season from that point in the regular season through the playoffs were actually pretty good. It was actually a lot like prior to the shoulder injury. So I was just, I really wanted to see how he looked this spring. And so far he's earned rave reviews. He looks really good. So I'm due to move him up some. But so he needs to go ahead of Patrick Corbin, who's not throwing his velocity's still down this spring. And I wanted to see what he'd do too. Not rave reviews so far, at least me being the reviewer. So I'll move him ahead of Patrick Corbin. But then beyond that, you get to like Lance McCullers, Jesus Luzardo, Sixto San. These are really good pitchers, I think. I don't know. Why do you have him ahead of those guys, Chris?
In particular, like looking at McCullers, I think the best version of Patrick or Charlie Morton is better than the best version of Lance McCullers. The best version of Lance McCullers.
I don't think we've seen the best version of Lance McCullers yet, to be clear.
That's fair.
He's on my breakout list for this year.
That's fair. He's just consistently been, a relatively high ERA guy. Not 4+, but usually in the high 3s. I would guess if we saw the best versions of both of them, based on what we've seen so far, at least Charlie Morton would be better in.
I mean,
at
Charlie
least
Morton
3 and probably 4 of the categories.
Charlie Morton was a Cy Young contender in 2019.
Yeah, he was a top 12 starting pitcher.
Very old,
last
and
year.
he's very old, and he had he was known for being brittle before that year. That was really the one year where he ramped up his workload like an ace, and then he had shoulder problems the next year. So that factors into thinking too. I mean, McCullers no model of health himself, right? I don't know. I need to think about that some more. I could see moving McCullers. I could see moving Morton up as high as like. I can't see moving him into my top 30. I can't see him moving him ahead of Chris Paddock. Let's say
that was exactly the name I was looking at.
He's one spot ahead of Chris Paddock for me in the overall rankings.
Boo. Boo.
I also think Chris Paddock is still a curveball away from being the best version of himself, and the version that we saw in 2019. It's not shocking that he wasn't as good in 2020. I didn't think he would be as bad as he was, but the peripherals in 2019 did not support the borderline ace production or the way he was being drafted. So,
but it helps to know he's got the spin rate on his fastball way up, and he looked into that this offseason.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of hope for a Chris Paddock bounce back.
I do too.
And yet I do think he overperformed a little in 2019.
Yeah. But it is funny that Scott has. I am 9 spots higher in the starting pitching ranks on Morton, and I'm 9 spots higher in the overall ranks than Scott is. Which just shows you the distribution of hitters and pitchers in our respective ranks.
Right. And something that you said, Scott, I thought was interesting about, you're watching guys in spring training to adjust your rankings. And I know normally we don't let that affect us as much, but I feel like after a 60-game season, we need to use this spring to watch guys more than ever before. Not that it should influence your rankings completely drastically. Oh, I'm going to move someone up to like number 1 in the ranks or anything like that. But, guys that we have seen that we saw struggle last year that were never as bad as that in the past, like Javier Baez and JD Martinez,
Gary Sanchez and
Gleyber Torres, and these guys, like if they look good in the spring, then I actually think that warrants moving way up your rankings. And I think you might see that reflected in drafts as well. So maybe that's
it's a dangerous game.
Yeah.
Probably best left to the hands of professionals. But
I would say I would just say there are going to be some guys whose spring performance portends things for the regular season performance, and there will be other guys who it doesn't.
Yeah.
And figuring out who the difference will be no more or less impossible than ever before. But historically, there's been very, very little difference there's been very little correlation between spring performance and regular season performance.
It's something like it has to be something you're specifically watching for, like Corbin's velocity,
Shohei Ohtani throwing all of his pitches for strikes, that kind of thing.
So if somebody I did not have any concerns about before, like I don't know, Zach Wheeler or something, if he's getting lit up this spring, and as long as it sounds like there's no velocity issues, no health issues, like I'm just not, that's just meaningless to me. So
no, I agree with that. And I'm not saying that we should overreact to someone like Mickey Moniak hitting home runs in the spring or anything, but specifically, and I feel like we said this a lot this offseason, probably more than in the past, is that we would always say, well, let's see how this person looks in the spring for a lot of guys that had these uncharacteristic seasons last year. So it's just, again, like seeing Anthony Rizzo hitting home runs right now and like high fastballs. That's something that I'm like, okay, I'm pretty interested in Anthony Rizzo on the fact that he is performing well. One of those names that you brought up, Scott, was Gary Sanchez. You took him in your Tout Wars draft, and you have him 4th in your catcher rankings in head-to-head points. Chris, you have him all the way down at number 12 in your catcher ranks. Chris, we will start with you. Why so low on El Gary?
I mean, all of it, everything, the way his career has gone, I think is a pretty good argument. Head-to-head points is not his best format. And this is another situation where the difference between number 12 and number 7 at catcher for me is very slim in head-to-head points leagues. But I think there are legitimate issues with his swing. And it's not the kind of thing where if I see him have a good couple of weeks in the spring, it's going to change how I view it, because he's a heavily timing based batter. He's got a big leg kick, he's got a lot of moving parts, and that's how he generates so much power. And he is one of the elite power hitters in baseball, not just at the catcher position. On a per plate appearance basis, he's as good as just about anyone. But
I don't know where this idea though that, oh man, his career has been like, in 2019, he was the second best catcher in fantasy points per game. In 2017, he was the best catcher in fantasy points per game. I did skip 2018. It was another bad year. But even it was bad. It was bad relative to the majority of his career, but it's not like he was not a starting caliber catcher in head-to-head points leagues. It looks like he had, even in 2018 when he hit 186, his power production was so good that he was the third best catcher in head-to-head points per game. I think he's fine for this format.
Okay, that's better than I gave him credit for then. And I wasn't saying his career's been bad. It's just he's been extremely inconsistent, and he's had a lot of trouble staying healthy. He's never played more than 122 games. Yes, he's a catcher, so there's a relatively high ceiling, but even that 2017 season, I'm pretty sure there was an IL stint mixed in there at some point. It's more like if I moved Gary Sanchez up to 7th and swapped him with Austin Nola, I could do that. I don't feel super strongly about it. It's more in a head-to-head points league. I'm not going to make Gary Sanchez a big priority. And if I miss out on him this year as a result of that, I'm okay with that.
But it is like what I see from him this spring, where he doesn't look helpless at the plate. He's hitting bombs again. That was, if not for that, I wouldn't have taken him in the 13th round of Tout Wars. Now, I think Chris would have even taken him in the 13th round of a 15-team league, right? So it was,
that's fine.
It was as much the value I liked there as the spring performance, but it was the intersection of those two factors as opposed to just one on its own.
And the thing I always struggle with he's looked good in the spring so far is I guarantee we could find a 7-game stretch last season where he had 4 strikeouts and 3 home runs or something similar to that. So it's just, like I said before, it's not the kind of thing, given how out of whack he's gotten at various points in his career, where, he's had a good 2 weeks, I feel confident in him moving forward. I think the inconsistency is part of the package until he proves otherwise.
He's also in the best shape of his life, Chris, which I don't know. I don't know that you've taken that into your...
That's fair. I have not taken that into account.
I'm looking at the game log. I don't think there was a 7-game or a 4-game stretch where he's... What was it? A 7-game stretch where he struck out just 4 times? That doesn't appear so. There was a 7-game stretch where he struck out 6 times.
Let me see.
But yeah, he'd still hit 10 home runs. So, but the strikeout rate was just absurd for him last year. It was crazy.
And if you want some top-notch fantasy analysis, every odd year, Gary Sanchez has been awesome. So just saying.
He had 3 different 7-game stretches last year with 5 strikeouts.
Okay, so progress.
Sorry.
That's Chris. This is what we're looking for in the spring. We're looking for progress, and that's what we've gotten.
How did you find that so quickly?
Fangraphs rolling game logs, baby.
I gotta experiment more with that, I guess.
Chris is a wizard. All right, we only have time for one more. So among these roto discrepancies, who do you guys want to talk about most? Trent Grisham, Victor Robles, James Karinchak, and Rafael Montero.
I don't think the reliever ones matter all that much. Scott and I have made
I'm really curious why you have Montero so high, but that's fine. Probably Grisham, right?
I think Grisham, we've talked a lot about Grisham. I've said my Grisham thing a lot, but we can do it again.
What was the other non-reliever?
Victor Robles.
Victor Robles.
Oh.
Scott hates Victor Robles.
It's just boring, but that's fine. We can talk about Victor Robles.
I think they might be very similar players this season. I think Victor Robles has a higher stolen base ceiling, and that's what we're very interested in. So in 2021,
I mean, Grisham looks like a 30 steal guy himself. Maybe Robles could be a 40 steal guy, but we've never seen that from him. And I have real concerns about how each of those guys,
Victor Robles and Trent Grisham, how their bats are going to play. And I have Trent Grisham higher than Victor Robles, but
as you should.
There are like Trent Grisham. I'm not convinced he can hit lefties at an adequate enough level to not face, either being moved down in the lineup or possibly even being platooned. That is a team that has a ton of capable players that they could swap in and out of the lineup. So I think there's some risk there. And it seems like Trent Grisham is one of those players for whom a lot of people are treating it as if 2020 was the first time we saw him in the majors and not roughly half of his major league career so far. He played 51 games in 2019. He hit 6 home runs, had 1 stolen base. That seems to be a Brewers thing. But he has 738 OPS. He hit 231. I think there is more risk in Trent Grisham being like a 240 hitter with 15 home runs than the consensus seems to give him credit for. He had
I mean, if he's
high
walking
infield
a
fly.
lot and stealing 30 bases, I don't know that that's a
I
disaster.
don't think 30 steals is going to happen.
25. I mean,
Yeah, he
what
was
he
on a
pace for
25
last
steal
year?
pace last year, but that was with only 1 caught stealing.
I would point out too, like you complain about the weak contact for Trent Grisham, like you do for Kevin Biggio. Kevin Biggio's expected stats because of his quality contact were microscopic. I mean, he looks like a slap hitting nothing. But Grisham, as good as he was last year, he actually underperformed his expected stats. He underperformed his expected batting average. He underperformed his expected slug. I'm not saying the expected stats are the end all be all, but I'm saying the quality of contact he made last year, according to StatCast, was good enough to earn him even better numbers than he actually had. So that's a big reason why I don't share your concerns. And obviously he dominated, and like his minor league stats were awesome. Grisham's were. So that's
yes and no. I think he dominated at
Triple
A for 34 games.
The most recent, yeah.
Double A, he had a 768 OPS.
Yeah,
I think he's going to get on base a ton.
I don't usually look at full minor league career stats because obviously players are changing throughout their minor league career, but that's fair. It is factual.
It just the case for him, like he took this big leap in 2019 in the minors, and then in the majors he wasn't that great. Okay, maybe he was acclimating. He took another leap in 2020. That's all possible. I think there are enough red flags, and I'm not saying I don't like him. I have him as a top 30 outfielder. That's really high. It's just, I have enough questions about whether he's one. I just don't think he's going to hit for batting average. I think he's going to be like a 240 to 250 guy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not counting on him being an elite stolen base guy. My expectation is more like 15 steals.
It's very fast, and the Padres love to run, and he's going to get on base a lot because of those walks. Whether he hits well or not, he's going to get on base a lot.
And he's leading off for one of the best lineups in baseball. So
we don't know if he's leading off. I will if we get a guarantee that he's going to be leading off every day, I will move him up because
he's going to at least lead off against righties. Wouldn't you agree, Chris? He did so last year. Why wouldn't he this year?
Probably. Yeah, I would assume so, but that's still, only 65 to 70% of the games. And if he's batting 8th against lefties, or if he's losing playing time against lefties, it's not that I don't see the upside that everyone else does, because I do. It's that there is more downside than, like, we're drafting him like 70th overall right now.
I agree.
That's a lot.
Some people might not be factoring in the downside, because I see what you're saying with the infield fly ball rate in particular is something that I don't like about him. 16% last year. That was pretty high. But everything, like, he hits a lot of line drives. He's been adequate against lefties so far in his career. And even if it's only against right-handed pitching, if he's leading off 65% of the time for the Padres lineup and 35% of the time he's batting 8th, he's still going to score 90 plus runs, maybe even 100 plus. I've made this comparison before with Kyle Tucker. Kyle Tucker might bat 7th for the Astros. He can easily move up. I realize that, but I just don't see a huge difference between Kyle Tucker and Trent Grisham, and people have so much more confidence.
I think Kyle Tucker's a much better hitter.
He's certainly a better power hitter, I would say.
Their minor league careers, he was much better.
Because I do need to move Robles up if he's for sure batting leadoff Victor Robles for the Nationals, as it seems to be trending that way. But I don't get this assumption that he's suddenly going to be a transformed player. I know obviously he had the great prospect pedigree, but he hasn't looked like a good hitter in the majors. He looked like an especially bad hitter last year. Small sample, whatever. He's been striking out a lot this spring, so I'm not really seeing transformation having happened here. Like, even if he starts out in the leadoff spot, I'm not confident he's going to keep it. So I get him as like a steals play. But to me, there's not a huge difference between him and like Leody Taveras, if that's all you're drafting him for.
I think part of it is his stolen base attempt pace while batting first or second in his career. I think I wrote this down the other day. It's like 45 or 50.
That can't be a very large
150. Sample, it's like 40 something games. I mean,
is that a large sample? I don't know. It sound like a large sample to me.
For Victor Robles' career,
52 games batting either first or second. He has 17 steals in those 52 games.
Correct. Yeah. So
that is
if he
like
if he hits well enough to keep the leadoff spot, and obviously that pace becomes the new standard for him. All right. I guess he's another Adalberto Mondesi.
I don't think he's Adalberto Mondesi.
I have no confidence in that. Like he still does not. I still have no evidence he's a good hitter, except for he was a big prospect once upon a time.
Yeah, I'm not counting on him being a good hitter. I think his career line, 250, 320, 407, I think that's perfectly attainable. And if they're okay with that from the leadoff spot, he could be a 35 steal guy. And that's the biggest thing for me is just with how much we're pushing steals up, give me the guy who legitimately does have 30 plus stolen base potential. I don't think Trent Grisham does. But
Leody Taveras,
I have Trent Grisham ranked higher.
That comparison.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do have Trent Grisham ranked higher.
Okay.
But neither is as high as Byron Buxton.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's a topic for another day. I think Chris has him all the way up at like SP outfielder 20 in Roto. So I appreciate the consistency there, Chris. The last thing I will say, put a bow on all this, is that and this comes from someone who likes Grisham, I do think that we're probably not factoring in his downside enough into his average draft position. And I think it's the complete opposite for Victor Robles. If he's leading off of the Nationals, I don't think that we're factoring in his upside enough based on where he's being drafted right now. We're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow with a live head-to-head points mock draft. Bye-bye.